All right, there we go. All right, so this is actually dated slightly. It's actually April 19th as opposed to April 14th. But yeah, this is going to be kind of an intro to Lens Protocol, and also we're going to build an app on Lens. So my name is Nader. I am the head of director. Actually, I'm the director of developer relations for Aave and Lens Protocol, and I've been in, I would say, the education space and software for about 7 years, and I've been a developer for about 11 years. And today we're going to be exploring Lens. Again, the beginning is going to be a presentation, kind of an overview of what Lens is, and the second part is going to be actually building an app on Lens, building a mobile app. So if you go to our documentation, Lens is kind of described as a composable and decentralized social graph ready for you to build on so you can focus on creating a great experience. And when I kind of first heard the term social graph, I didn't really know what that meant. So we want to definitely dive into that a little bit more and speak really also more directly to how Lens specifically is architected to enable developers to build applications. So I think a good description for developers specifically is that Lens offers a protocol and a suite of tools and APIs for easily building social apps or integrating social features into existing apps. And when we start looking at all of the most used applications in the world today, we start realizing that there is actually a social component to most of them. And if you look at the 4.85 billion or so people that are on social apps today, you start realizing that the majority of people are very familiar with this use case. And therefore, you can build applications that can be widely adopted. And I think this is outside of the scope of what you typically see, I think, in blockchain and Web3, where we're often building financial applications that are, typically only going to be used by a much smaller percentage of the population. If you look at the number of people that are using DeFi, actual people, not bots and airdrop farmers and all these things, it's actually not that many compared to what you might see people using things like Instagram and TikTok and so on and so forth. So when you think of a social application, you might think of some of the ones that I mentioned before. Like you might think of maybe something like Instagram or Twitter, like I mentioned, but in reality, a social application is any application that kind of allows you to do one or more of these things: create a profile, follow other users, publish content underneath your profile, view a feed of other people's content that you're following, or that's recommended to you via some recommendation algorithm. So beyond those basic use cases, you often might see social features in other apps that you use every day. So for instance, for developers, GitHub is a very good example of that, where you can kind of, create a profile when you sign up, but you can also follow other developers. And when they start something or when they create a new repo, that shows up in your feed. So you don't think of GitHub as like a social application, but it has social features built into it. Also, Stack Overflow has some component of social there, where you kind of see activity and you kind of see users' profiles, and you can look at those people's profiles and things like that. So this is a very useful type of feature that you kind of often need in your application. And one of the things that Lens does is it abstracts away the need to build that yourself. And instead, you can kind of rely on an infrastructure that is there for you to use as opposed to building it from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and get my demo ready. Just 1 second. Okay, cool. So yeah, when we're done with this, we're going to be kind of building out an app. Okay, so for a good example of what Lens applications look like, I'm going to kind of show you a few of them. So this is Lens Tube. And one of the cool things about apps on Lens is that if you sign up for Lens and you start building out your profile and your followers and your network, you actually have that same network across every single application that comes online anytime in the future with Lens. So when I first signed up for LensTube, I already had X thousand number of followers, even though I'd never seen the app before in my life. And this is really cool because a lot of people build up their social following on one application and then see a new app come out later, and it kind of wipes out their social graph, and they have to kind of start over from scratch to build that up again. So a good example of this, somewhat recently, I guess, is TikTok. That's been around for about 5, or more years at this point. But when TikTok came out, everyone had to kind of start again from scratch. But every time a new Lens application comes online, you kind of continue having your follower graph follow you around. So we have Lenster, we have Butterfly, we have LensTube, like I mentioned, we have Orb, we have Oolala, we have dozens of high quality applications already on Lens. And all of these applications use the same social graph, but they allow creators to express themselves in all types of different ways. So if you are a musician, or if you want to do video, or if you want to create content like you would on Twitter or whatever, like different platforms kind of cater to different types of creators. So how does Lens actually work from the perspective of a technical overview? That's what we want to look at now. So at the very core of Lens is a set of smart contracts that defines everything within the protocol and how you interact with it. And these smart contracts are deployed to Polygon. And on top of the smart contracts, we have a really high quality API for querying the data. Because if you read data directly from a smart contract, you're very limited on the types of information you can get. And you can't build the high quality, high polished UX that people are just used to. So if someone uses TikTok, or they use Twitter, they use Instagram, there's literally infinite ways that you can query these APIs, whereas smart contracts just don't allow you to do that. So for instance, databases are very optimized. So you can hit a database with the query, and you can say, give me the last 100 users to sign up from this specific region that have this last name, or whatever you want to say, and you can get that information, and you can get it in a very performant way. And that's just because databases have been optimized for tens of years to kind of give you this. So we've wanted to offer a same experience, like a really high quality querying capability directly to developers without them having to kind of build anything. So we've built that GraphQL API. When I say we, I'm really speaking to the engineering team on Lens, who's amazing, and they've done a really good job with all this stuff. So we have dozens of different API endpoints that are available via actually just a single GraphQL endpoint, but dozens of different queries that you can hit for getting different selection sets of data from the API. In addition to just having a good API, the applications on Lens have a high bar for the user experience that you often don't see in other Web3 applications. And it's due to two things. One of them is gasless transactions. So users don't have to pay for gas for interacting on the protocol. They can post, they can comment, they can mirror, which is kind of like a retweet, and they can create content all for free. And this is because the gas is subsidized by the protocol, but by us. And the way that's like enabled is because, like in the past, that really wasn't possible, because when you had protocols like Ethereum layer 1 or some of the older protocols that were very expensive, it would cost, at the cheapest pennies, like a few dozens of pennies to create a transaction. And at scale, that would be extremely expensive. But what we're getting to now is that we have very, very inexpensive protocols, and we have even more work that's being done to make this even less expensive with some of our new architecture that enables us to subsidize transactions the same way that Instagram subsidizes their back end. You don't expect to pay money to tweet, you don't expect to pay money to post on TikTok or YouTube, but those companies are incurring an infrastructure cost. But they, of course, are not going to make the users pay for that. That would be kind of crazy. But that's kind of what we've seen so far in Web3. But we now have infrastructure that's cheap enough for us to kind of start treating it like traditional infrastructure. So that's kind of how the infrastructure is subsidized by Lens. And then we also have a dispatcher, which really, to kind of boil it down, allows people to use the app without signing for every single transaction. Now, you wouldn't want this type of abstraction for financial applications, because you wouldn't want to say anyone can just spend money on my behalf. And no one's really actually going to be doing it on your behalf. You're just going to authorize certain transactions to be created by an authenticated user for doing certain things. So in this case, for Lens, you might say, I want to authorize this dispatcher, which is kind of the default method, to create posts, to comment, and to share. So that means when I log in and I'm authenticated, my session will allow me to post without having to sign for every transaction. So when you combine the gasless transactions and the dispatcher for signless transactions, the UX feels exactly the same as it does if you use Twitter or Instagram or something like that. And then we also have an optimistic UI or an optimistic API, meaning that even though the transaction may have not settled on Polygon or whatever underlying decentralized network that you're posting to, the API will treat it like it has. And therefore, if you create a post and then you refresh, the post will persist, even though it may not have already settled to the underlying network. And again, this provides a similar UX is what most people just would expect. And then also, one of the things that we focus on is the developer experience, because Lens is a protocol. We don't actually have an app. All of the applications that I showed you were actually built by other developers. And that's kind of the main thing. We want to enable developers to build applications easily. So we'll look at the developer experience, and then we're gonna kind of like test this out by building something. So beyond the GraphQL API, we have a few different SDKs and other tools that are available. So one of them is the React Hooks SDK. So the GraphQL API is really great and allows you to do pretty much anything you would want to build most of the applications that you would need. But you also have to kind of deal with GraphQL. And I think a lot of developers that are new to development or new software developers don't like having to write out these long GraphQL queries, or it might be somewhat a barrier to entry to them. Also, there is a lot of verbosity in these GraphQL queries. They're very big. So often a GraphQL query could be 10 or 20 lines of code, but it could also be 100 lines of code. So the React Hooks SDK makes this a lot easier and a lot smaller amount of code to work with. So you can do some of the same things you can with the GraphQL API with only like 2 or 3 lines of code with the React Hooks SDK. The React Native Lens UI Kit is what we're going to be demoing today. And this is a mobile SDK for building mobile apps on Lens. And a few of our hackathon winners have actually used the Hooks SDK and won prizes. It's a really great way to quickly get up and running, building out basic functionality that you can then expand upon into more custom designs and things like that. We also have Lens widgets, and Lens widgets are actually I'm going to kind of run through this like this. So that's kind of what the React Hooks SDK looks like. You would import some action or some API, in this case, explore profiles. And this would kind of be a recommendation algorithm for profiles. The React Native Lens UI Kit would be something like this. You import a feed or a profile or a list of profiles, and then you just render them with like 1 line of code. And then the Lens widgets and embeds are a way to do integrations with Lens into other applications. So you might want to use Lens just to sign in, or you might want to kind of get more virality for your application by allowing people to post to Lens and maybe Twitter. So we have the share on Lens button, 2 lines of code, you're ready to go. You might want to render a profile or a publication from a user. Again, 1 or 2 lines of code and you're kind of ready to go. For the profile, you actually have to pass in a profile ID or a handle, but still it's just a couple of lines of code. And then we also have this Lens BigQuery API, which I'll talk about here. And this is really cool because all of the Lens data is, posted over time in a series of transactions, but to actually query for all of that information, it's been stored over the course of like a year, and it's a lot of data. And our main API only really allows you to query up to 50 items at a time because it's mainly built for application developers. But the BigQuery API is meant for API developers and data scientists and machine learning people that are building out their own algorithms and things like that. So with the BigQuery API, you have access to the entire Lens data set, and you can hit this API with massive queries and get literally hundreds of thousands of results from a single query. So a lot of people are using this to build out really interesting tools like recommendation algorithms or custom APIs. Also, Lens has support for encrypted DMs using XMTP. So we have a namespace that you can use that will integrate with every other single Lens application in the world, meaning that if someone sends a DM on your app, then they can continue the conversation on every single other Lens app. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of like a unified inbox. And I kind of showed on the Lens widgets and embeds how you can do the follow, share, and other different types of integrations. So one of the things about Lens that is unique, I think, is this idea of extensibility. So imagine if you had Twitter and you wanted to add a custom feature that you wanted, but it wasn't there. Well, basically, there's nothing you can do, right? You just kind of like, oh, that sucks. You might tweet about it. But with Lens, you can actually submit a pull request in a sense by just building out your own custom functionality in a module. And a module will allow you to build out any types of functionality that will be enabled through any type of action on Lens. So following, sharing, creating posts or anything like that, you can kind of build out your own custom functionality using one of these modules. So an example of like some of this custom functionality is this is some of the different, I would say, options that you now have for collecting a post that you as a creator are kind of sharing. And this is kind of an optional screen that you can kind of get to. By default, all of this stuff is kind of set to a smart default. But if you want to say, okay, this post, this tweet or whatever can be collected, and I'm going to charge this price for collecting it. I also want to reward anyone who kind of retweets this a percentage of the fee if someone does collect it. I want to limit the number of people that can collect this. And I may even want to split revenue between multiple people. So a good example of this is actually just, I think, yesterday, the day before, Ricky, who's an engineer that builds a lot of cool apps on Lens, took an idea that I had and actually built it out. And then he tweeted about it, or he kind of shared it on Lens, and he set a collect fee of like $3. And he shared 25% of that revenue with me. And he had a bunch of people, a fair amount of people, I think, collect that. So anyway, you can do all types of different things like this that you yourself can determine, what that functionality is. So this is an example of what that split revenue feature looks like. You can kind of set a collect fee of, say, $10, and then spread that amount across as many different wallets as you'd like. Another thing I want to focus on is this idea of composability. And I think composability is definitely not specific to Lens. It's more a Web3, I would say, characteristic. And it's a thing that really was exciting to me about this public, decentralized, open infrastructure. But specifically for Lens, this definitely shines a lot, I think, mainly because of this completely public and open infrastructure that's made even better with our APIs, I think, because just like serverless infrastructure or managed services like Auth0 or serverless functions or Twilio or any of these things that allow you to build out high quality apps without having to build out all that functionality yourself. That's kind of how Lens works, but for social applications. So you only really have to build out the front end. You don't have to build out the back end. You don't need to deal with the database. You don't need DevOps on the back end. You don't need QA or anything like that on the back end. The only thing you're worried about is building out a web or a mobile or both. And what we're seeing now is teams of one that are actually building out applications that are getting funding, that are literally really good applications that in the past would definitely not have been really possible with a single developer. And as you're building out your front end, we're continuing to build out and improve the back end, making it faster, making it better, building out more different queries and things like that. So composability for the developer, in one sense, is you're able to build off of the back end that we're building and other infrastructure that's just out there in Web3. And then you're also inheriting a user base and an entire ecosystem when you build on Lens. Because even though we're in closed beta, we still have over 110, I think, thousand users. And when you build a new app on Lens, you automatically inherit all those 100,000 users that can start using your app immediately. So you don't have to bootstrap that user base from scratch. So what does the tech stack look like for a user building on Lens? And when I kind of talk about the tech stack, I'm really speaking beyond just our SDKs. I want to kind of talk a little bit more about other things that you might want to work with. So if you're using our GraphQL API, you need to use some type of GraphQL client. And there are a lot of them out there that work really well. Urkel and Apollo are a couple of them. But you can also just use the Fetch API or Axios. You just have to kind of write a little bit more code in that way. I mentioned the Lens SDKs. You also need to have a way to upload metadata, similar to how NFTs have like this metadata URI. Publications also have that. And you can choose to either upload that to IPFS or Arweave. Typically, developers are using Bundler with Arweave because it's extremely fast and it works really well. In fact, we're seeing more and more people kind of lean towards Bundler, which is kind of what I would recommend. For video integration, we have LivePeer as a really, really popular choice. If you want to build streaming or just any types of video integration in your app, that's what most people are using. You've probably already used things like WagMe hooks. You've probably already used things like Rainbow Kit. All of those things are, also things that you'll use in your Lens application. And then for the client-side framework, that's completely up to you. We've seen native iOS apps, seen Flutter, React Native on mobile. We've also seen on the web single-page apps built with Create React app, and then Next.js for server-side rendering and things like that. And then for encrypted DMs, I already kind of mentioned XMTP, but it's a really, really simple way to kind of get up and running with DMs. Even if you're not building on Lens, it's still a good choice. So next, let's talk about some of the major concepts, and then we're going to start building. So the main idea to kind of understand of how Lens works is like everything's built off of a profile. And this is kind of the main object in Lens. So when you sign up, you get this profile, and then everything that you do is kind of attached to this profile. And the profile is an NFT, and therefore you can have somewhat of ownership of it, meaning that you can transfer that to a different address. You can sell it if you'd like to. You can burn it. You have the ability to move it around. And again, this contains the history of the posts, mirrors, comments, and any content that you generate. And the content that's created is created in the form of a publication. And there are three types of publications. There are posts, comments, and mirrors. And these, again, are all posted to the profile owner's NFT. And the content URI is attached to this publication with all the different metadata. We also enable gating of publications with different access conditions. So you can say someone has to have collected this publication in order to see it, or they have to have followed me, or they have to have bought one of my NFTs or whatever on-chain conditions that you want to put there. And then finally, we have this idea of collects. And collects allow people to mint a publication into an NFT. And this is where some of those features I showed earlier around adding different conditions around a publication really come into play. So this allows you to make monetize your publications. A couple of recent examples that are really cool that people have done is that, really a collect, again, is just publishing something and saying you can collect this for $1 or $2. And most of the time, these things are low cost but high volume because of the scale of the number of users that are on Lens. So a few days ago, there was a music artist named Rock who had, I think it was either, it was a MP3 or some type of audio he had created about 4 or 5 years ago that he hadn't really done anything with. And he published it to Lens with the collect fee of, I think, $2 or something like that. And he said, hey, I haven't released this before, but this is something I recorded a long time ago. If you want to support me, you can collect this for, I forgot, it was like $1 or $2. But I think he made around $3,000 off of that. And it only took him a few seconds to kind of post that. Another good example of these low cost, high volume types of collects is someone who quit their job to go full-time building on Lens. And he tweeted about it or posted about it on Lens, and he set a collect fee of $2. It was actually Tumatic, and he had almost $30,000 in collects from people that supported him, and it took him only a couple of seconds to kind of post that update. So again, these low-cost, high-volume things are possible when you start getting the type of scale that we're starting to see on Lens. And this is still closed beta. So I'm assuming once open beta is there and we have beyond hundreds of thousands of users, we get to millions, that people will be able to kind of experiment even more and make even more or create even more value out of the protocol. Okay, so with that being said, I want to demo an application. And what we're going to do is we want to build out a mobile app. And I know this is probably really small, so I'm going to zoom in a lot. And I'm just running this app on my local machine. And I'm going to pull up the iOS simulator, and we're going to build out an example app using the React Native Lens UI kit. Yeah, sorry I'm missing some of these questions. Yeah, I'll definitely get to all of those questions in just a moment too. Right, here's a simulator. Okay, it looks like the app is working. And what we want to do is we just want to build out a mobile app on Lens, as quickly as possible. And we're really starting from a completely empty application, as you can see, to kind of just really show you as quickly as possible the most basic thing you might do. I'm going to import a component from React Native Lens UI kit called profiles. And this is going to start off by rendering a list of profiles. And I will add some padding to the top, like 70 units or something like that. And the most, simple thing that we can possibly do is just kind of get started in this way. But this is a good example of what type of UI that you might be able to kind of get for a prototype or a hackathon, or even just building out a basic feature in your app. And all of these components are very extensible. So for instance, you can pass in all types of different props here. So you can change the styling, you can attach click handlers to all these different things. You can do quite a bit more, which is what we're going to show in just a moment. But the reason that this is so powerful is that you can really get up and running without having to write a lot of this boilerplate. And because when you think of UI kits on web, we're able to build UI kits because we are very familiar with the underlying properties. We have paragraph elements, we have headline H1s and H2s, we have text inputs, we have buttons. We've been using these components for years across every single application. But when you start thinking about social applications, we've also been using the exact same components across all of those. When you load Instagram, you get a feed of publications. When you load YouTube, you get a feed of users. Of course, they're displayed in different ways, but all of those different components, Instagram, TikTok is a feed of publications. What if you can kind of like really, I would say, abstract those away and make it just really simple to get started with those same types of features? And that's kind of the general idea here. And again, there are dozens of props that you can pass in here. You can pass in a custom query. I think I see someone questioning or asking the question like, where's the query happening for the profiles? There is a default query, but you can pass in any query that you like. And pagination is actually built in. So if I scroll to the very bottom here, you'll see that it actually refetches the next 50 items or the next 25 items, and you keep going. So like there's some somewhat complex features that are just built in. So pagination is like one of those things that's already built in. What we want to do next though is we want to make this more real world, because like just showing a list of profiles doesn't mean much. you want to be able to click on one and see more. So in order to implement navigation, we need a navigation like setup, and in React Native, we're going to need to use the React navigation library. So I'm just kind of rewrite this to, instead of returning the components alone, I'm going to return a navigation stack. And instead of having just that single component render, we're going to render the only screen as the profiles. So I'm just trying to kind of go ahead and update that to add the navigation stack. So the only thing I've done really, if you see at the very top here, you'll notice that it has this profiles component. And I might say my lens app to make this look a little better. Okay, cool. So now we have my lens app and we have navigation set up. So what I want to do now is be able to click on a profile and navigate to that. So here in this profiles component, I've added a new prop called on profile press. And this is a click handler for clicking a profile. And right now, this is not going to work because we haven't created this component yet. But I want to navigate to an individual profile and view the profile details. So I'm going to create a component called profile view.js. And this is using the profile component. So in the last component, we used the profiles plural. Here we're using profile singular. And the only thing you really need to pass into a profile is either the profile ID, the profile handle, the Ethereum address, or the entire profile. So it doesn't really matter. The main difference is that if you pass in the ID or the handle, we have to go and fetch that. But since we already have that profile information, in this case, we can just pass it in as a prop. So that's what we're doing here. And then we have a handler, a click handler for clicking on a comment, which you'll see in just a moment, where we can actually see the comments for the profiles feed of publications. Anyway, so this is a profile view. We've done it in 21 lines of code. So let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and import profile view. And then we're going to add a new component to our stack called profile view. And then what's going to happen now is if I click on one of these profiles, I can now view the profile details along with a feed, of that user's publications. And we've done all this again. This is like 21 lines of code. And this is very extensible. Again, we can attach a click handler for clicking any of these different buttons. And literally all these different things have click handlers. They also can be overridden with styling and things like that. So the next thing I want to do is let's see here. Well, let's first update the styling a little bit, because I think I'm a big fan of dark theme. So I'm going to import dark theme from the React navigation library. And then I'm also going to import from the Lens protocol, React Native Lens UI kit, Lens provider, and theme. And Lens provider allows you to pass in global configuration to your entire app. And what you might do here would be to pass in the networks. So you might want to work on like Sandbox or testnet or something like that. You also might want to change the theme. So here I'm going to set the theme as theme.dark. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And now we have a dark theme with the app that's still working. And you see that even the child components are all also dark theme. The next thing I want to do is I want to be able to view comments. So if someone like clicks on this comment, I want to be able to view those comments. So we're going to create one last view called view comments. And here we have this comment view component. And we're passing in a custom query because we're using the feed component, which brings in just a feed of publications. And this can be all different types of feeds. It could be a feed of, in our case, comments, but it could just be publications. And you can pass in any type of query. Again, by default, it does come with a query. But in our case, we're going to pass in a custom query. And then we are going to have an on comment press handler there as well, because we want to have recursive comments. That way, because like if someone comments on a comment, we want to continue being able to view all that stuff. Actually, I'm going to redo this naming convention to make it consistent. So it looks like I have profile view and view comments. I'm going to rename this to comment view. And now we just need to add that to our navigation stack. And I'm going to look at profile view to make sure, okay, cool, that the naming is right. So I'm going to go ahead and click on, let's see here, Josh, who's the engineer on Lens. I'm going to click on the comment view. And now we can see the comments. And I can view on the comments there, other comments, or at least I should be able to. Looks like I have some error on my recursive comments. I think it says comments view. There we go. So now we're able to view recursive comments. And then the last thing I want to do is make this a little better, because this is just giving me a default recommendation algorithm, but I might want to be able to actually search those profiles. So I'm going to import search, and search has the same API as the profiles component. It just adds like a nice little search bar. So now I have a search bar here, and I can search. I can look for my own profile. And there we go. I see my own profile there. And I can start seeing some of my own comments and stuff like that. Okay, so I think that's about it for the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and check out some of these comments to see if I can help out. Yeah, someone asked about the VS Code commands. That's using the user snippets and VS Code. So you can basically just program different shortcuts to kind of render lines of code, and it's really great to use for these types of examples, because having to write all that from scratch is probably not a big deal, but you end up having small typos that break, and then it's kind of not that great of a experience. So I'm not sure if there's a opportunity to take any questions or.
Yep. We've still got about 10 minutes or so, and then I'm not sure if it will take longer, but if it does, I can always transfer the meeting over to Juliet, so that way we don't leave anybody out on that.
Sure. So maybe I'll go through some of these comments here.
Sounds good.
All right, let's see here. Is there a way to get a Lens ID for testing without waiting in line? Yeah, I mean, right now we have like a closed beta, meaning that you have to kind of be given a handle to join Lens. We're actually about to roll out a brand new process that's very, very straightforward for anyone to use Lens. Anyone can kind of just sign up and get on this wait list, and then you kind of get an email. But I think for anyone that's a developer that's here for this hackathon, if you can get your handle information and I'm sorry, get your Ethereum address information to one of the organizers, I'd be happy to get you a handle right now. So but you don't need a handle to build on Lens, but I would still be happy to get one because it's better to have one if you're building on Lens, so you can kind of use the apps and see how they work. Can a user address have multiple profiles? Yes. So a single Ethereum address can have several profiles attached to it if they like, but mainly you just have like a default profile set to that address. Is there a way to display some posts in one app but not others? Yeah, there's all types of metadata filters that can be done within the app, and you can filter on app name, you can filter on metadata, you can filter on all sorts of stuff. So it's up to the application developer to display whatever information that they would like to show in their app. For signing transactions, there is a way to do that. So I would say, it's very similar to, since you're using React Native, very similar to what you might have used for web. You can still use ethers and all that stuff. The main problem that people have with React Native is the wallet connection stuff. So Wallet Connect is somewhat buggy right now when they're moving from V1 to V2. And there's a lot of things that are kind of not quite 100% understood. And there's certain things that actually don't even work. I know that a few weeks ago, even Rainbow and MetaMask were not supported in Rainbow, and in Wallet Connect V2. What I've had a lot of success with lately has been the mobile SDK from ThirdWeb for React Native. It's very simple to kind of use, and I think it's a good thing to use for now until Wallet Connect figures out like what they're doing there. Yes, so Lens profiles and handles we're rolling out something once the protocol goes permissionless, meaning anyone can just sign up for an account just like you can for Instagram. That will eliminate the need to have a profile, period. So I can't talk more about exactly how that's going to look because it's somewhat confidential, but I think the idea that it would have a monetary value attached to every single user is kind of doesn't make a ton of sense. But people will always be able to have handles, but I think there's also going to be a mechanism where you can just create a profile without needing a Lens handle. The way that exactly going to look, we haven't really disclosed that, but that's definitely one of the things that we're focusing on. Like the two main things that we're focusing on as we continue building out the protocol itself is making it more scalable. So right now, Polygon can only handle, obviously, I think 100 or so transactions per second before it starts kind of somewhat failing or having issues. So we're moving to a new infrastructure in the next couple of weeks that we've been testing out for, I guess, almost half a year now, that scales to in the range of 55,000 transactions per second. It still uses Polygon in some ways, but it also expands how we think about data availability and data storage. We still are having everything permanent, immutable, but everything, I think, being on Polygon doesn't make sense when you want to get beyond where we are today. And then the other thing that we want to focus on is enabling permissionless access. So we think that just how people use Auth0 or things like that, they don't really know they're using an Auth0 app or they're using a Twilio app. I don't think people should know that they're using a Lens app. I think they should just be able to sign up and just start using the app. And that's kind of ultimately where we want to go. And that's where we are going. So. And I think that's the last question that I see.
Awesome. This has been an amazing workshop, by the way. Just watching all of this. I'm personally not a developer, but I try and familiarize myself with everything, and this has been great. I love Lens. So.
That's awesome. I definitely recommend any developer here, anyone here, period, that wants to learn more, just check out our docs at lens.xyz. We have a developer garden that has quick start guides and links to all the stuff that I went over. And we have a lens.xyz/apps, which shows you all the apps that people are building and gives you more inspiration there. And yeah, all types of stuff that you can dive into.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nader.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.